Forum of Central Europe. My name is Michał Wiśniewski, and I will moderate I'm the moderator of the session dedicated to resilience. We started 2 days ago with first 3 presentations. Yesterday we could see another 6 of them, and today, during the final day, we'll have 4 more presentations dedicated to the issue of resilience. The topic resilience came from the discourse of nature protection, the discourse of environment. Right now, resilience is being used also for the discussion about the cultural management and cultural protection. So, what actually resilience means for culture? It helps us to understand that we need today to refigurate our way of thinking about monument conservation, heritage management in the terms of change. We are living in the times of major shift of our civilization, if I may use such a big words. And somehow we need to react concerning the way that we are dealing with the objects of culture, objects of cultural heritage. Today we will have 4 presentations, and I would like to welcome the participants of this very session. At first, I would like to welcome Dr. Monika Stobiecka from Warsaw. Then I would like to welcome also Miss Sonya Darrow from Brno. I would also like to welcome Miss Dalma Varga from Hungary. And finally, last but not least, I would like to welcome Miss Marta Wróblewska from Gdańsk. 4 presentations are at the front of us. Please be aware that we will have also the Q&A session at the end of this panel. Please use chat to ask questions. At the end of the 4 presentation, we will have the time to discuss the presented topics in details. But right now, I would like to give the floor to our first panelist, Dr. Monika Stobiecka, who represents the University of Warsaw. Dr. Stobiecka, she's an art historian and archaeologist, assistant professor at the Faculty of Liberal Arts at the University of Warsaw. She's a fellow of the Dobrzezie Lanskoroński Foundation, as well as of the Kościuszko Foundation and the Foundation of Polish Science. She collaborated with several Polish museums and galleries, the Museum of Modern Art and the National Gallery Zachęta in Warsaw, as well as the Museum of Architecture in Wrocław, among the others. Dr. Stobiecka is interested in critical museum and heritage studies, archaeological theory and methodology. So, welcome at the 6th Heritage Forum of Central Europe. The topic of presentation is Heritagization, degrowth, preventing strategies and cultural resilience. Monika Stobiecka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Jump right into the topic of degrowth, preventive strategies, and cultural resilience on the example of heritagization. Yes, in 1992, Walsh recognized and named a process of heritage making that he called heritagization, but he also read dangerous threat to heritage all over the world that is connected to heritagization. By using this term, he wanted to make a point about the indiscriminate process of heritage making that may result in gentrification, monetization, commercialization, and capitalization of heritage. And he wanted to urge us to look at the meanings of heritage that surround 20 years later, this term was adopted by the representatives of critical heritage studies, especially by Rodney Harrison, Laura Jane Smith, Cornelius Holtorf, and Alfredo González Ruibal. Scholars noted that heritagization became a consequence of late capitalism and linked it to phenomena like capitalist accumulation of objects. They urged that heritagization results in growing numbers of insufficiently protected monuments and objects. In my view, heritagization is not only a dangerous effect of capitalist accumulation, it is also a process that may end with diminishing heritage value. In other words, when everything becomes heritage, then nothing is protected nor considered important or valuable. In my talk, I will reflect on the possibilities of preventing heritagization in each of three valid heritage paradigms. So first, the traditional protection of monuments, second, management and adaptation of heritage, and finally, the heritage as process paradigm. In assessing which result in more sustainable heritage practice, I will use the category of degrowth associated with the critique of late capitalism. My considerations will be illustrated with the case study of the modernist heritage in the Warsaw district of Powidl. Currently, there are three major heritage paradigms exhaustively described by Gregory Ashworth in several occasions. So first, just to remind ourselves about those theoretical paradigms. The first paradigm, the oldest one, is obviously the traditional protection of monuments rooted in the 19th century intellectual currents promoted by Alois Riegl, among others. This paradigm is, of course, based on expert opinions delivered by specialized heritage institutions like UNESCO, national ministries, conservation and protection of monuments offices. Objects identified as monuments are listed, registered, and described to finally be given a status of a monument or a heritage site. The stake of this paradigm preserve monuments and objects in their best condition, and as a result, many can be inaccessible to the wider public. Uses of heritage are considered dangerous because they are related to exploitation, trivialization, deformation, and various damages or even destruction. The clue of traditional protection of monuments is to protect, no matter why or for whom. The second paradigm, distinguished by is the management and adaptation of heritage, developed in the 60s of the 20th century. This paradigm facilitates a targeted protection approach, so the protection plan is closely related to the contemporary functions of heritage. As a result, many objects are adapted to serve various purposes, like, for instance, host a museum, host a public institution, or serve as a settlement or tenement, for instance. And in many cases, they become heritage, attract tourists or local inhabitants, and foremost, they can buy themselves or fully cover the costs of maintenance and renovations. Finally, the third paradigm to the development of heritage studies as a discipline and the critical heritage studies is focused not on material heritage as such, but rather on cultural, social, and political phenomena that relate to monuments and sites. It states that heritage is made by various stakeholders and not admired or visited, like in the previous paradigms, but rather practiced and lived with or lived in. An important part of the paradigm heritages process are the bottom-up initiatives, activist movements, activist groups, and recently also digital networks facilitated through social media. In many cases, heritage is made by a collective effort of non-specialized or specialized or partly specialized groups of different stakeholders. Let us now look how those paradigms cross paths in the Warsaw district of Powidl to further investigate how they affect modernist heritage. The Powidl district of Warsaw became popular at the beginning of the 21st century. It was the time of investments that consequently led to the growing interest in the Vistula neighborhood. In the first decade of the 21st century, Pomyśle was one of the most popular districts of Warsaw that attracted more and more developers, services, and tourists. A district covered with public parks open to the Vistula River and foremost located closely to the city center started to flourish. However, the rapid and intense investments posed a threat to various monuments situated within the district. This could have been the case of PKP Powiśle, the lower entrance pavilion allowing to access the train station Warszawa-Powiśle. The station pavilion was provided with an impressive roof canopy in form of an elliptic paraboloid. Together with the upper pavilion located on Smolna Street and origami-looking platform canopies designed by Arseniusz Romanowicz and Piotr Szymkowiak and built between 1962 and 1963, the railway station presented an interesting example of socialist realist architecture in Poland. Before the district started to develop, the pavilions were in decline. The lower building hadn't been used according to its primary function. It was left to decay. The situation changed after the modernization in 2009 when it was turned into a club as proposed by the Centrala Architectural Studio. As soon as the lower pavilion became PKP Powiśle Bar, the first heritage activists started to suggest that it should have been given the status of a monument. At that time, many socialist realist buildings were demolished, and the growing popularity of Powiśle's Bar made the case to fight for modernist heritage. It was no earlier than August 2018 when PKP Powiśle officially became a monument. Thanks to the decision of Jakub Lewicki, the Mazowian conservator, PKP Powiśle is protected. However, the famous club lost its popularity over the years. The new bar is regularly attended by locals and tourists who enjoy modernist architecture. This could have been also the case of Powiśle Pavilion, a canteen next to the KCPZPR hotel situated 10 minutes of walk from the PKP Powiśle station. The pavilion and the hotel were built in the 30s. Since the 60s, both buildings had been owned by the Central Committee of the Polish United Workers' Party. The pavilion, designed by an unknown architect, was impressively decorated with abstract mosaics in glass and stone. This cube-like glazed building, supported on lightweight structure, later on became a restaurant and a cafe. During the communist times, the building was attended by locals and enjoyed popularity. Poles have recently had a chance to see the lively cafe when Maria Sadowska shot the movie about the famous Polish sexologist Michalina Wisłocka. The pavilion was also revived in 2012 when Grupa Warszawa, a collective agenda of investors who support modernist heritage, rented the building and turned it into a bustling whiskey bar with live music. For many years, people were enjoying the parties at the Syreni Śpiew, the mermaid song, as it became the new name of the pavilion. At the same time, heritage activists were suggesting that visitors to the Syreni Śpiew had a destructive impact on the building that might have resulted in serious damages to the architecture and mosaics. Even though many claimed that Grupa Warszawa, so the ones who rented the building and turned it into the club, impacted the architectural tissue of the building, it was the developer who delivered the extremely worrying news in 2016. The land where Syreni Śpiew stood was bought by Radius Developer Company, who decided to demolish the building together with the neighboring hotel. Thanks to the intervention of heritage activists from Tu Było, Tu Stało and Miasto jest nasze, among others, the pavilion was saved. In 2017, the decision of the Mazowian conservator followed the wishes of modernist heritage fans. The pavilion was saved as a monument, but was lost as a bar. Now it enjoys only the graffiti makers who regularly visit it. Mosaics are seriously damaged, and the building is falling into decay, left and forgotten by the official institutions and activists. Ruination is also the scenario for my third and last example from Powiśle, the Hungarian Export Commission located close to the Łazienki Royal Castle in the south part of Powiśle district. The building was designed by Jan Zdanowicz and its interior by Bronisław Eibel in 1972. This luxurious two-story pavilion was awarded the title of the Mister of Warsaw in 1973. For many years, it was used by the Hungarian embassy to promote and exhibit Hungarian products. The spacious hall on the ground level opened to the glass walls and inner courts. The upper level of the building served to host offices. The elevations were covered in black-white vitro mosaic. The project was designed in such a way as to include trees that were already growing there. The Mazovian conservator claims that the artistic and historic value of this building is comparable to the Rotunda PKO, Emilia Furnishing Store, or the cross-city line railway stations like PKP Powiśle or PKP Ochota. Even though highly appreciated, it was left and abandoned at the beginning of the 21st century. Recently, it became a fashion set for Polish designers from alternative brands like Balagan and Elementy. However, even these photo shots did not prevent the building from further oblivion. In 2019, the building was officially announced a monument by the same conservator who registered PKP Powiśle and Powiśle Pavilion, Jakub Lewicki. The same conservator, however, agreed upon a renovation plan proposed by the Hungarian embassy. As Tu Było, Tu Stało, a heritage activist group, informs, the renovation will pose a serious threat to the original project. The Powiśle district's modernist heritage serves as interesting and fertile ground for theoretical considerations concerning the aftermaths of heritagization. Within one district, within one district, we can all see we see all of the three heritage paradigms in practice, namely a practice that contributes to the growing number of valuable heritage that becomes meaningless. The first case study, the PKP Powiśle Lower Pavilion, represents a scheme of heritage paradigms precedents. Firstly, the pavilion became a popular and attended venue that enjoyed the public interest. People were admiring the architecture of the building while having a good time in the bar. So we can see a scheme for heritage as process paradigm, where the public is making architecture meaningful not only as a bar but as heritage that allows for self-identification, creates the sense of place, should be popularized and finally protected. Heritage as process, however, changes into the adaptation and management of heritage paradigm when the bar owners realize that heritage value drives the popularity of the bar. Eventually, the success of the venue, partly a commercial one obviously, contributes to the official protection. So we can see the last paradigm, traditional protection of monuments, in action. The second case study presents a different scheme where the adaptation paradigm fuels the recognition of heritage value. However, the attended bar becomes a burden for local heritage activists, so to protect the building, they organize a protest to influence the city authorities. The situation is even more serious because it's fueled by the decision of the developer to demolish the building. As a result, the bar is closed down and the building, officially a protected monument, protected from demolition, falls into ruination. Here we can see a scheme of adaptation and management paradigm followed by traditional protection procedure that results in heritage oblivion. The last example, on the other hand, shows exclusively the traditional protection of monuments paradigm where once popular and admired building is appreciated only by the specialized officers who make the decisions concerning its future. The ruined building is for a short while revived by the officers and then once again threatened by the owner's plan and forgotten by the public. The point I would like to make here concerns the amount of officially protected heritage. As all of you can imagine, the above-mentioned cases are not the only buildings from Powiśle deserving to be protected by law. In a series of publications about Warsaw architecture, Powiśle is represented by 60 valuable buildings. And my point is not to limit their number, but rather to show how growing amounts of legally protected sites become meaningless, become ignored, forgotten, and finally ruined. My conclusion, and at the same time a solution proposal for the effects of heritagization, so a random and very often aimless selection of objects that become a monument on the apparently protected site of artistic, historic, or scientific value, is to consider the fourth possible paradigm for heritage practice, that for the purpose of this speech I name degrowth paradigm. According to the degrowth global network, degrowth is an idea that critiques the global capitalist system which pursues growth at all costs, causing human exploitation and environmental destruction. The degrowth movement of activists and researchers advocates for societies that prioritize social and ecological well-being instead of corporate profits, overproduction, and excess consumption. This requires radical redistribution, reduction in the material size of the global economy, and a shift in common values towards care, solidarity, and autonomy. The degrowth paradigm in heritage practice could challenge the heritagization problem. Firstly, as a theory, it encourages a critical reflection on capitalist accumulation, already recognized as an important factor shaping the direction of heritagization. Heritagization is just a more sophisticated way to name heritage accumulation, capitalist accumulation. Let us then think about controlling the numbers of heritage objects and sites. Secondly, the growth paradigm promotes means of sustainable development by shifting the way we attribute values. One of the means the growth network pursues it is by extending the democratic decision-making to allow for real political participation. This idea well refers to the situation encountered with PKP Powiśle heritage scheme. Various stakeholders made the building value and matter as heritage without the legal label. Heritage was made slowly, in a longer time than, for instance, in the second case, the Powiśle Pavilion, where the interest of activists was motivated mostly by a demolition threat. The lesson that can be learned from Powiśle's heritage suggests that long-term strategies of heritage making that facilitate the democratic and open use of heritage may succeed, contrary to the arbitrary legal decisions that make heritage only grow in numbers. Thinking about degrowth as a possible heritage future scenario, I would say that it lays between the adaptation and heritage process paradigms, but it emphasizes what is generally the clue for degrowth theory and practice: orientation towards sufficiency moderated by the long-term social engagement. The degrowth paradigm then would stand as a preventive strategy to heritagization, while prioritizing social engagement and bottom-up initiatives that are not reactionary to heritage demolition but are based on long-term heritage practice. This paradigm could foster cultural resilience and resilient heritage that truly matters. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for bringing us to Powiśle. presenting us this very case, Powiśle, and to a certain extent Warsaw, is a huge battlefield between the real estate developers and the activists. So within last 10 years, there were plenty of conflicts, contradiction issues dedicated to the heritage objects, helping to ask the questions: what actually the heritage is, and what are the limits of heritage? What shall we protect? So thank you so very much. I have many questions, but I will keep them for the later part. And to all of the participants, please use chat to ask the questions. We will go back to the questions at the end. So after the Warsaw case, right now I would like us to move to the Czech Republic, and would like to invite Miss Sonya Darrow, the Dr. Sonya Darrow. Sonya Darrow is a PhD student of sociology at Masaryk University in Brno. She's a participatory-based artist who engages in socially cooperative art practices. She pursued a master's in cultural sociology with her socially cooperative heritage projects, Stezky Pathways, mapping the cultural landscape of Czech settlements in Iowa through object, sound, and folklore. She continues her sociological research in participatory-based art with the most recent work in the folk movements, Folklore's Not Dead. Her research topics include sociology of art, sustainable heritage practices, and collective storytelling. Her long-term interest lies between art and sociology, focusing on the intersection between them as public sociology of art. Sonya Darrow, the topic of your presentation is Folklore's Not Dead. We will move from the big city to the issues of folklore. Thank you for that. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and greetings from Brno at Masaryk University. So I will just jump into it since we only have 20 minutes, and I'm covering a quite big topic, which is the folk movement, Folklore's Not Dead. With this movement, what I want to do with this presentation is to discuss a little bit about how it started and what my role and other people's role is in the project. And the project itself, okay, now the clicker's moving, sorry. Delay in the clicker. Is that the project itself started actually way back with my own heritage, which is a Czech American. I grew up in the largest Czech settlement in the US, which is Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And we dealt with 3 once-in-a-lifetime climate disasters in only 13 years. And the first one being the floods of 2008. And that's where I started to question about the place that heritage exists after a climate disaster wipes out a good portion of it. And we have to rebuild again. So I started to ask these type of kind of rather difficult questions during a difficult time with people. And this extended into a project that is called Stezky Pathways. And this is mapping the cultural landscape of these different Czech settlements across the state of Iowa and the US, and questioning the place of heritage and folklore within their communities. So we would work together collectively on creating different pieces. This piece that you see here, I will just briefly mention, is a piece that is made from different objects, and each object tells a story of their heritage and what it means to them. So we wanted to create a folk piece together, and this is just one example from the project itself. The reason why I am bringing this up before going into Folklore's Not Dead is that this was really the beginning of my art practice, which was engaging critically with heritage. And it has led me all the way to here in South Moravia with the movement Folklore's Not Dead. The main point I'm making is that environmental sustainability goes hand in hand with keeping folk art traditions alive and relevant for the future, and that we need to acknowledge that environmental sustainability plays a significant role in order to keep heritage alive. This is where Folklore's Not Dead steps in to inspire all generations to find solutions, not only about preserving, but restoring the meaning of folklore. We need to go back to not only a slower process of making the objects, but more importantly, to seek ways towards a fuller meaning of sustainability. And part of this means collecting resources from our immediate environment, which goes back to the root of folklore, which at times it can mean trash or rescuing items that might go to waste or end up in the landfill. Just so everybody knows, I'm sure everyone knows where South Moravia maybe is in the Czech Republic, but the area that I'm specifically dealing with is known as the Pilisi region, which is very densely populated of folklore. And the project started, the movement started with this everyday folk dress, which is ordinarily beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, but it's not one that is widely known. And over time, it has slowly started to kind of disappear. And so the movement started through this kind of everyday folk dress and the meaning behind kind of the everydayness of it. And it was spearheaded by a woman named Zlata. And she is actually the director of the South Moravian Community. She started to see over a decade ago how drastically the cultural landscape was changing and that this folk dress was slowly disappearing, but also people were actually throwing it away, actually throwing it in the garbage, and she was rescuing it. And over time, people realized what she was doing with it, so they would, I guess, not throw it away anymore and give it to her. And so with her foundation, she started to sell these garments in order to fund different workshops geared towards saving not only this folk dress, but other folk practices across South Moravia, which I will get into throughout the presentation. An important part, and I will talk about this a little bit further too, is engaging still with these women that wear this everyday folk dress. And it's a certain collective of women, and it's important to have them still involved in it, not just to understand how to make the folk dress, what it means, but to go into we discover even deeper layers of meaning behind how they put on their folk dress and what it really means specifically to each individual. So the other organization that's part of this movement is Nadace Veronica, or the Veronica Foundation. It's an environmental foundation here in the Czech Republic and based mostly in Moravia, and it's been in existence since 1990. It's really great to have them be part of this movement on the environmental side because they also still deal with cultural sustainability in their work, but they bring in the components that we want to work with in Folklore's Not Dead, that it's not just heritage in these folk traditions, but also relating still to the land and to nature. So the group of women that I was briefly mentioning that are part of this project is this collective. And not many people know about the name of this collective either. So it's the Vikernice. And it's this word that they decided to call themselves, that it's more about this kind of rural pride, but they're the women that wear this everyday folk dress, or this Vyšední kroj, or also the working folk dress, the pracovní kroj. And these group of women are amazing. And they not only just wear this folk dress, not only going to church, as you see in this photo, but they also want to keep it alive and they want to work with the movement itself. So it's interesting to have them be part of it. So the next photos that I will be showing you is documenting some of the women in their homes, and this was being done by photographer Liba Taylor. So these women, we also refer to them as these heritage caretakers. And here, this is important to show, is that it's not only preserving or understanding the components of a folk dress, that it's the jacket or the lace or the apron, but it's the way that it's put on. And again, it's still not just going into the way that it's folded, but you see in this image how the woman is also caressing her face and how it feels onto the contours of her face. And those little inner kind of meanings are very important, I think, to document and to be part of the process of the movement. And it's also documenting them because a lot of them, they still make the folk dress pieces as well and care for the pieces. And this image is one of my favorites, actually. Photograph them in their space, show them as makers. I wish I could tell stories to each one of these, but there's limited time. Perhaps during the question and answer, you can always ask me. But I wanted to give you at least kind of an idea of this collective of women. The other group that we work with is Eco Textile, which is a high school here in Brno that is fairly new, and it works with textile sustainability. So we work with the students from first level all the way up to now we're going to be entering into the last grade of the class. And we start them out with a lot of the key kind of foundations of what is folklore of the region, connecting them to people like Marie Shvirgova. I know a lot of us have been trying to find ways during the pandemic to keep our projects alive, and we were able to get internet out to some of our older population that don't have internet at home, but they could still be part of our movement. So that was really a unique part in this last year of trying to adapt and still have the older generation be part of it. So as I said before, environmental sustainability and cultural sustainability are at the core of Folklore is Not Dead. And that might mean collecting items from immediate environment, collecting items from the ground and using it. I wanted to show this one because this is actually another kind of part of the practice of the movement. And this is my favorite Czech word. And it's oshumili, and it really fits perfectly with the movement itself. That it's a word used to describe a well-worn piece of clothing. A piece of clothing that has witnessed history, tells a story, becomes heritage. This piece of story is at a moment known as the autumn of its wear. The reference of autumn connects to the origin of the word, trees and forest. The sound at the beginning of the word, osh, is the sound of the wind rolling through the leaves of a tree. Oshumili is used in various ways to describe time and place and the way that time pulls at the threads of the clothing, unravels the structure, and shuffles it. This word is perfect for what it means to not just preserve something, but even try to give it perhaps even new meaning or dialogue. Another part of it is working with herb collectors, foraging, getting back to the roots of even how folk motifs are created, which again, we involve the Vikernice women in the process to find different folk motifs. So we do workshops on finding folk motifs in our immediate environment and what they mean to us today. And then also this piece. This is another part of the sustainability practice that we push in our workshops and educational components. And this is a headdress that I actually created, and it's from soda cans, beer cans, tuna cans, corn husks, broken glass, mirrors, Christmas ornaments, random textiles, beautiful textiles, all sorts of different things. And what I try to show is that you can take a traditional technique such as lace making, which is here, and use found wires from the ground and be able to still use that traditional practice, but using a material that would have been actually ending up in landfill. So I will show this again. And going back, heritage caretakers of Moravia, and that the older generation is so important in this movement. And It was created actually in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, this exhibition that I worked with Monika at the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And part of this exhibition was also connecting with the caretakers back in Iowa. And one of them is Marge Nadel, who is a legendary Czech-American folk artist. And she does different folk paintings. And so we wanted to introduce her to Marie Švirgová, who I already discussed from Lonžot. She actually came over to Cedar Rapids, Iowa at the age of 83 and was able to connect with Marge. And we were able to connect the two of them to have this beautiful moment together, to talk about their different techniques, discuss what heritage means to them. And this is also important, is the skill sharing among different individuals in different generations and in different places. So one thing I wanted to end with last is another piece of what happened, bringing Marie Švirgová all the way to Iowa in the US. And we took one of her patterns that was actually in her home, because she's a well-known folk painter here in South Moravia. And this is her pattern. And we wanted to do a series of workshops, and this is with 50 to 75 participants from people in Iowa, but also people who traveled from Texas, Chicago, who came to be part of this exhibit, where they were taught how to do this particular folk technique. And it's a very collective experience. And what I also did during this workshop was have it be not just a collective or cooperative experience in making, but have it be a discussion as well, to get to know your neighbor, but talk about their own heritage in that moment. And I will end it also with some of the pieces that Marie Švirgová did in Iowa. And it was really unique to have her there and for people to be able to see her at work. She spent about 5 days on these rather large folk pieces. So I wish I had more time to be able to talk even deeper about some of these different themes that we're working through in the movement. And as I mentioned before, it's been hard this year not to be able to meet with people and to continue these workshops. We're planning workshops that'll start at the end of this summer into the fall, and with high school students too. And the big part of these workshops is trying to find ways to connect cultural sustainability with environmental sustainability. And the environmental part, what we're trying to do is understand from some of these women, like the Vikernice collective, first learn how they create what they create, understand how the different techniques are done before we can really begin to find solutions to what type of materials might be better for the future. So I will leave it at that, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see one comment on the chat. Angelika Madura said, "Awesome lecture, Sonia. Thank you. I can only add my thanks for your presentation. It's really amazing what you just presented us, the way of dealing with objects from the past and using them for the very creative and contemporary use, keeping them alive, not as objects that are conserved, but as the objects that are alive, and they are part of identity of contemporary. So thank you for that. I have many questions, and I'm just reminding that there is a chat and everyone can put his question, her question on this chat, and we will go back to these questions later on. Right now, I would like to thank you, and right now we will move to the third panel presentation of this very session. The name of this session is Preserved and Lost Landscape Heritage Under Pressure from Agglomeration, the case study of the Pilisi Sziklák Nature Park. This presentation was prepared by the group of researchers from Hungary, a large group: Nora Hubanie-Horvat, Dalma Varga, Kristina Filepne-Kovacs, Edina Dangsokne-Forisz, Ildiko Modosne. That's the group of the authors. They represent the Hungarian University of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and I just trying to get the information. Are we already connected? Oops. I just heard. Oh, okay. The person who will present us this topic will be Dalma Varga. So I will not. I will stop right now and give the floor to our presenter, Dalma Varga. The floor is yours.
Do you hear me? Thank you. Thank you. So, I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to be here and that we can present the results and the conclusions of our project. So in the next 20 minutes, I would like to talk about a case study of the so-called Pilisi Sziklák Nature Park in Hungary. First of all, on this slide, you can see the end of the presentation. In some words, I will talk about the actualities, the methods of the project, and give also a brief description of the case study. After this, the focus will be on the results. So, what gives this project topicality? Just a few aspects to mention. Defining landscape changes, the importance of heritage protection and preservation, both natural and cultural heritage, and the very actual phenomenon, the effects of the pandemic on touristic habits. Every year, our department in an area consisting of several settlements importantly focus on its heritage, particularities, and possibilities of development in the form of student workshops. In this presentation, I will show an area which has a diverse historic landscape, which is rich in cultural and natural heritage, but at the same time it is located partly in the agglomeration zone of the capital city, Budapest, and it is under growing urbanization pressure. In this research, we used the GIS methods. The students with the teachers, professors, have built landscape changing processes using historic maps, for example, military maps from the 18th and 19th century, topographic maps, aerial photographs, and of course several written sources. They have analyzed touristic opportunities, life-changing processes, elements of landscape heritage, stable and low uses, and the effects of agglomeration pressure. In some words about the study area. It is located in the northwest periphery of capital city, Budapest. It is in the Pilis Mountains. 7 settlements belong to the analyzed area, namely Pilis Szentlélek, Pilis Szentkereszt, Keszthely, Szántó, Pilis Csév, Pilis Csaba, and Pilis Jászfalu. In terms of its outstanding natural values, a significant part of this area is covered by the Dunai-Ipoly National Park, and the Biosphere Reserve area can also be found here. 5 settlements of this analyzed area, Keszthölgy, Piliscsév, Piliscsa, Pilis and Kento, established Pilisi Sziklák Nature Park in 2090. But what is the role of a nature park? It's quite different from natural park in Hungary. Besides protection and preservation of the natural resources, human resources, and cultural heritage, it is very important to be part of spatial planning, economic, social, and cultural development, and as well as to provide a sustainable area for recreation, recharging, and leisure activities. So, now talk about a little about tourism of this case study area. One of the pillars of the nature parks is tourism, basically sustainable and soft tourism, because another pillar of nature parks is the protection of values. So the difficult situation in this area, because approximately 3.5 million inhabitants live in the agglomeration zone of Budapest. So this Pilisi mountain became a recreational area for them. In popular places, there's a large crowd. So our main goal was, in touristic aspect, to pull the loads, these burdens apart in space and also in time. Many types of values are present. So kinds of tourism are possible. From them, we need to choose sustainable soft tourism types, such as hiking, cycling, beach tourism, and gastrotourism as well. During the pandemic, mostly during the complete lockdown in 2020, even public parks were closed. People escaped even more to this area. Hiking revived, an enormous number of families wandered in the Pilisi Mountains. Outdoor places, green places, and educational trails are of great interest. So the need for sustainable development was demonstrated during the pandemic. What were the suggestions? So, or suggest to develop the, to develop attractions in addition to relieve burdened places, to develop touristic infrastructure, for example, to create information boards, smart tours, so that visitors can get to know use that this landscape hides. To plan a green road, which can be used on foot and bicycle, which also integrates manufacturers producing local products. To provide quiet, peaceful roads for pilgrims, and to develop tourism management organizations. Now I would like to talk about landscape heritage, the historical maps analysis. With the help of military maps, topographic maps, the dominant land uses can be observed in the different historical times. But what tendencies can be seen on these maps? The proportion of the built-in areas has increased intensively. A significant part of the meadows and wetlands, there's an error with my clicker. Okay. So the proportion of the built-in areas has increased intensively. A significant part of the former meadows and land have disappeared to this day, replaced by another land uses. The vineyards and orchards, which played such an important role mainly in the 19th century in this area, have been disappeared, distracted to the present day. All these changes have been shown very. You can see this on this diagram. I would like to emphasize one element, the meadow with trees, which reached their greatest extent in this area in the late 1800s and in the middle 1900s, but now have almost totally disappeared. We also analyzed those determinant processes that formed the Pilisi landscape. People lived in this area in Roman times also. There are evidences of it. The remains of connecting routes between the major centers of these times were between Esztergom, Visegrád, and Óbuda. We should mention the role of the royal forests, which provided hunting opportunities for the royal family during the period of the Kingdom of Hungary. I would like to highlight a few more factors that played a major role in the landscape formation of the Pilisi mountains. Monastic orders, for example, Paulite and Cistercianors, the beginning and the end of lime mining, the intensive appearance of tourism, and the enunciation of protected areas in this region, and so on. We could list more and more. In short, there have been a number of processes over the centuries that have significantly determined the image, the structure, and the character of the Pilisi landscape. This slide resides the analysis of stable land uses. We can see with green, yellow, orange, and red colors those land uses that can be considered stable land uses. On these areas, the analyzed land uses have not changed more than 200 years. This means about 30% of the whole case study area, which is not a very large amount, but remarkable. Mostly hunting forests belong to stable land uses. We should talk about a little built-in areas. As you could see on the previous slides, the proportion of built-in areas has increased significantly during the analyzed periods. Averagely, 10-fold increase within built-in areas extent can be observed. The largest increase can be seen in Pilis Csaba, Szentkereszt, Pilis Szántó, and Pilis Csév. All these cause many problems and land use conflicts in the area because growing population needs more and more aid to build. So it leads to the loss of their use, the destruction of historical land uses, and the transformation of ecological features and the landscape as well. If we look at the map of Hammurabi, which is the degree, which shows the degree of human influence, we can see the former royal hunting forests, which are emphasized among the most stable land uses. These are the least affected by anthropogenic influence in this area. And as for the landscape heritage of the area, it can be statable that this Pilisi area is extremely rich in both cultural and natural values, both surface-like and point-like values. A total amount of 972 landscape elements and values were explored in a systematic list, of which 20% are natural values, 40% belong to cultural heritage, 60% be considered as unique landscape elements, and 6% are elements of archaeological heritage. Some example for the cultural heritage, for example, Paulite Monastery in the heart of the Pilisi, an example for natural heritage, a spring in Szentkereszt, and example for unique heritage, a breathtaking view from the top of castles. So, Unfortunately, there are a lot of values, elements of cultural and natural heritage that have been lost during the last decades, such as the remnants of Roman and medieval roads, lime burning kilns, water mills, glassworks, as I mentioned, the meadows, vineyards, orchards, and the meadows with trees. So, in conclusion, what are the most important threats and possible solutions in the case study area? First of all, the agglomeration if the suburbanization pressure. The number of inhabitants increase radically in some of the settlements, for example, in Pilisi, which is a city in this area. A change of residential areas can be observed because of this phenomenon. What can be the solution? Maybe regulations and proposals to protect the traditional settlement image, the traditional settlement character, and the landscape structure character. Another problem is the loss of the values, the intensive change of the traditional land uses, such as vineyards, orchards, meadows in this area. We should protect and restore these areas where we have opportunity by the help of the local people. The loss of cultural traditions of minorities due to newcomers is also a very important threat. The solution can be for it to arrange traditional events so people can get to know the importance of these traditions of the minorities. The nature park seeks to a possible solution to all these problems. So, for example, it helps to contribute to of the landscape heritage, the preservation of traditional land use, landscape structure, the strengthening of local identity, but also contribute to the infrastructural and economic development area and sustainable tourism types, since outdoor landscape heritage has become a major resource for tourism during these hard pandemic days, and prospectively it will be in the near future as well. So with these thoughts, I would like to finish our presentation, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. You presented us how much we accustomed to losing the natural resources that are all around the metropolitan areas, not only in Central Europe, but actually it's a much bigger universal problem. And because of the urban sprawl and urban growth, we are losing so much, and this kind of research is so very important. I'm keeping my questions for the later part, so thank you at the moment. Please be with us. We will go back after the last presentation. To all of the participants, I would like to remind that there is a chat, and if you have any questions, it's time to use it. Right now, I would like to invite the last speaker of this very session, namely Ms. Marta Wróblewska from the University of Gdańsk. Marta Wróblewska is a curator and culture manager as well as art critic. She obtained MA in art history as well as in English philology at the University of Gdańsk. Currently, she's a PhD student in history, art history, and archaeology at the History Faculty of the University of Gdańsk. She accomplished postgraduate studies in EU funds and cultural and creative diplomacy. She's also a guest PhD student at the Technische Universität in Berlin. Marta Wróblewska, she's also an author of articles in art magazines, exhibition catalogs, and scientific publications on art and new museology. She's a member of International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art. She's also a board member of the Gintergrass Association in Gdańsk, and the manager, and for many years she was a manager and curator in Gdańsk City Gallery. Welcome to the 6th Heritage Forum of Central Europe. The name of the presentation is Patterns of Subjugation of Cultural Heritage to Political Strategies, analyzed on the basis of examples of selected Polish museums. Marta Wróblewska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the chance to present my research. And yes, I will concentrate on the relations between cultural heritage, mainly museums in Poland, and some of political strategies on the basis of some examples that I selected from Poland. But first, to give you an overview of the development of Polish museology after 1989, because that is a crucial thing to understand my my presentation. So yes, we know in Central and Eastern Europe that in 1989 was a very crucial turning point, also in the history of Poland, and it concerned political changes, social, economical, and cultural transformations as well. The local government's reform that was introduced in Poland in 1990 meant a significant revolution with regards to institutions management. It provided regions and cities with more authority as far as money distribution was concerned, for example. Many local authorities were motivated to redefine or come up with a new vision of the future for their cities. And on the one hand, Robin Ostow justly proves that the end of the Cold War marked an important breakthrough in identity policies all over Europe, giving voice to those who had not been heard before and for whom very often museums became the agoras for practicing civil activism and developing identification processes. But on the other hand, scholars like Tony Bennett, for example, who was inspired by the thought of Michel Foucault, claim that cultural institutions became tools for practicing soft diplomacy. And this instrumentalization, aiming at the implementation of cultural and identity policies, is practiced by the policymakers on many various different levels of intensity. Also, these circumstances that I mentioned naturally encourage the museums to rethink their traditional structures, communication channels, and educational activity profiles. It also inevitably led the museums to becoming an important part of the public debate, as well as the subject of political interest. The actual museum boom in Poland is dated between 1995 and 2005. In this period, the major reforms had already been introduced and incorporated, plus Poland joined the EU in 2004, which gave more chances for international exchange and financial possibilities. And museums started to be more and more active and creative in stimulating the development of culture and societies within their cities and regions, becoming a significant part in the evolution of the heritage history and politics of history. And politics of heritage, I'm sorry. And to elaborate more on the examples of actually the relation, the subjugation of cultural heritage to political strategies, I would like to outline 3 fields of operation that we can consider, and they are architecture and site, they are canons established by museums, and they are updated communication strategies that are practiced by museums. As far as architecture and site are concerned, there are 2 ways of operating, mainly by rebuilding, renovating, and adapting historical architecture for museum purposes. Well, this serves as a form of preserving the continuity of tangible heritage. And here you have the example of the Schindler's factory and the interior of Museum of Warsaw. Another field of operation is to erect new buildings that serve the functions of monuments or sites of memory. And that not only legitimizes selected narrations, events, or people, but also might imply close relations with the founding authorities, resulting in the implementation of particular visions of memory, as well as the lack of political neutrality on the part of the museums. And here you have two examples from Gdańsk. As far as establishing canons, of course, institutions, museums can establish canons by promoting selected aesthetical conventions, forms of narrations. They can create new heroes. They can reconstruct history and try to fix the past in line with the current political situation and politics of history. Museums can also update communication strategies. They can introduce modern ways of communication adjusted to the needs and demands of contemporary audiences, including the attractive and creative use of new, often spectacular technologies. Then this is the way to establish the bond with the audience, to build loyalty circles and enhance the emotional relations with the institutions, as well as a way to fulfill the civilizational needs of the modern audience. Also, the introduction of fashionable and innovative offerings like VR zones, impressive multimedia happenings, or attractive contemporary gadgets reduces the distance between the institution and its audience, and allows the public to participate in a museum program that is less hermetic and closer related to popular entertainment. And now I would like to take you on a trip to some of the museums in Poland. And first, well, of course, Warsaw, because that's the capital of Poland. And I'd like to mention two museums in Warsaw. First is the Warsaw Rising or Uprising Museum, because that's really what the case is. This is about the war. This is the first narrative museum that opened in 2004. And its establishment dates back to the decision of the then mayor of Warsaw, the late Lech Kaczyński, in 2002. The fundaments underlying the concept of the museum anticipated the upcoming city development strategy introduced in 2005. It involved the revitalization of historical heritage. In this case, as you may see in the pictures, it is an electric plant which was adapted for museums purposes. The museum itself broadened considerably and attractively the cultural offer, becoming Warsaw's new cultural trademark. It introduced the new vision of patriotic education based on active, hands-on audience experience. The implemented practices and solutions like new technologies, communication methods became the model to be followed by numerous institutions created in Poland in the following years. The above-mentioned strategy of development for Warsaw also strongly emphasized the need to strengthen the local traditions based on cultural heritage. Its updated version from 2018 additionally underlined the role of the inhabitants in active co-creating of the local cultural identity. And this local approach is strongly represented by the Museum of Warsaw. The exhibition in its main branch, located in one of the historical houses by the Old Town Market, was rearranged in 2017. The current permanent show, called The Things of Warsaw, is composed of 7,000 objects arranged by theme and genre in 21 cabinets. The tangible objects representing all kinds of areas of life in Warsaw are the starting point to tell numerous microstories concerning people, events, and processes which shaped the contemporary image of Warsaw. These often banal, everyday objects like tourist souvenirs, postcards, pieces of clothing, wrappings of goods produced in Warsaw, old city maps, etc., function as traces of memories, taking the viewer on a time travel to the past, bringing them closer to the real everyday city and its inhabitants. And so now let's go south to Krakow. I mean, we should be already in Krakow physically, but that's unfortunately impossible. I would like to take you to some of the Krakow's museums, very special museums. And in the current development strategy for the city of Krakow, introduced in 2018, the local culture is defined as the material and spiritual repository accumulated over many centuries, closely based on the ideals of national identity and tradition. The local cultural attractions are conditioned by the unique genius loci. This is the undefined spirit of the city and its aspirations to hold the position of the symbolic deposit of Polish national heritage recognized worldwide. An interesting line of narration developed by the Museum of Krakow is devoted to commemorating the 20th century Polish history and martyrdom. Three of its branches, Pomorska Street, which is a former Gestapo prison, the Eagle Pharmacy, which is a place of salvation of Jews from Krakow's ghetto, and Oskar Schindler's Animal Factory, which presents Krakow under Nazi occupation, accompanied by the story of the salvation of the Jews working for Schindler, together with the former concentration camp, the memory site Karl Płaszów, form a memory trail, commemorating the history of Krakow that developed from 1939 till 1956. And this history is presented in a wider national and international context. One might observe in the case of the above-mentioned museums a peculiar emotional approach to the presented historical narrations and content, which encourages subjective interpretations. The counterbalance for the martyrdom narration is offered by the Home Army Museum, opened in Krakow in 2012 in an impressively restored historical fortress, as you may see in the picture. The revalorization and restoration of this historical building complex itself was part of the then binding development strategy for Krakow introduced in 2005. The museum presents comprehensively and a wide range of subjects connected with the Polish underground military forces active during the Second World War. However, it does not primarily concentrate on individual heroes, with a few exceptions concerning high-ranking officers or prominent partisans, focusing rather on the political and military history introduced with a number of combat strategies, war activities, enumeration of forces and names, supported by countless archive materials and military exhibits. It represents the new approach to patriotic education, emphasizing heroism and encouraging the feeling of national pride. And there was a spoiler. I would like to introduce you at the end to my city. So we're going north of Poland now to Gdańsk. And as far as Gdańsk is concerned, its memory is shaped by two major themes: the material losses during the Second World War that were followed by the reconstruction and preservation of local heritage, historical heritage, and the post-war exchange of inhabitants. The latter was the reason for the discontinuity of the local memory and identity. It also inspired the invention of new local myths and traditions, especially strong after 1989. One of them is Gdańsk's multicultural past, which, as some researchers point out, is a way to come to terms with its German history. Another myth is connected with cultivating the memory of Gdańsk's golden age, going back to the themes of the medieval Hanseatic League's activities. One of the symbols of the city's historical affluence and international importance is amber. Thanks to the program called Gdańsk, the World Capital of Amber, launched by the local authorities in 2006, the Museum of Amber was opened in the same year in the prison tower, which is part of the city's medieval fortifications. The ambitions to cultivate this symbol as of the city as are growing, and the best evidence is the museum's new seat to be opened in July this year in a freshly restored medieval grate mill. In 2000s, Gdańsk started to be referred to as in the local promotional materials as the city of freedom. The development strategy for the period 2004-2015 emphasized the traditions of freedom and openness as major qualities defining the city. This intangible heritage is in Gdańsk quite site-specific, as it is represented by the history connected with the local shipyard where communism was overthrown in the 1980s. At the shipyard's edge, the European Solidarity Center was erected and opened to the public in 2014. Its modern architecture is inspired by rusty ships still repaired just around the corner in the shipyard. The institution itself is often referred to as a living monument to the victory brought by the peaceful revolution of the Solidarity movement, composed mainly of the shipyard workers led by Lech Wałęsa, which marked the beginning of times of freedom and democracy. In accordance with its mission statement, the institution represents this history of solidarity in a large European context. And of course, as the site of the outbreak of the Second World War, Gdańsk would not be complete without a proper museum dedicated to this event. Initiated in 2007 by the then Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the Museum of the Second World War was built in Gdańsk's Old Town and not, as it might be expected, on the Westerplatte Peninsula, where the first shots on September the 1st, 1939 were actually fired. The pyramidal architecture of the museum, however, quickly became a symbol of the city. The main exhibition space was placed a few levels underground so as to hide the entire evil there. The war was pictured as frightful terror and suffering happening on all fronts, the main intention being to present the human dimension of this military conflict. The institution's opening in 2017 was accompanied by a serious political conflict. The right-wing successors of Tusk and his political party had different vision of the museum's narration. According to the central authorities in power, that is Law and Justice Party, the globally presented history of the war was allegedly in conflict with the presentation of the Polish perspective, while excessive emphasis of the suffering of civilians and soldiers took place at the cost of manifesting their heroism. In consequence, 2 weeks after the opening, the Ministry of Culture announced the merger of the Museum of the Second World War with the new Museum of Westerplatte. This allowed for personal changes, and thus the first museum's director and the co-author of its permanent exhibition, Paweł Machcewicz, who was initially nominated by Tusk, lost his position. Some changes to the permanent exhibition followed in order to correct the identified mistakes. An additional set of war heroes, including Polish partisans, was introduced. The terror and genocide of the totalitarian regimes were emphasized. The part concerning Poles rescuing Jews from the Holocaust was more elaborated on. Names of German soldiers were removed from the list of the Second World War victims, and the traumatizing effects of the war were developed. The film, concluding the exhibition presenting Poland after and the world after 1945, was exchanged with a new animated movie called The Invincible. The film is made in a convention of a superproduction with superheroes. All this resulted in a lawsuit for copyright violation filed by the authors of the original exhibition script. And I mentioned before Westerplatte. Westerplatte itself, until 2017, was under the jurisdiction of the city of Gdańsk and functioned as a former battlefield with just a monument to the defenders of the coast erected in 1966 and a few ruined original buildings and bunkers spread around the area. After its takeover by the ministry-run Museum of the Second World War, new development plans for the area were proposed. They include, among others, controversial reconstructions of selected historical buildings which were destroyed during or after the war. The modern infrastructure and adaptations of the area on Westerplatte are aimed at satisfying the need of contemporary visitors and, quote, introducing new spirits into the historical space. Such practice, however, seems controversial because it is not entirely in accordance with international laws concerning restoration. If you consider, for example, the Venice Charter from 1964. And this Venice, the laws concerning restoration that stress the value and respect for original material and authentic documents concerning the reconstructed monuments. And to conclude, museums and political authorities are institutions which construct and shape cultural identities and heritage policies. According to Michel Foucault, they are closely related with the distribution of power, as they not only produce knowledge, but also plan, select, and emphasize particular elements of reality. Some researchers, as the mentioned Tony Bennett, even go as far as perceiving the museums as tools for implementing the ambitions to control the society by controlling the meanings and important sites. The above analyzed examples clearly show that there is no and cannot be, in fact, any independence between institutions and their organizers. The question is, however, to what extent the freedom of the institutions to implement their own programs and visions is respected. And thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so very much. We started today with discussion about how heritagization might be a strategy against the real estate developers, and we are ending with a presentation how heritage might be used for the political purposes. We can see that heritage is a sword with two different blades. Thank you so much for this presentation. We still have some time for a discussion, and I'm very happy to see all of the participants of this afternoon panel. I should once again remind that there is a chat. If anyone would like to ask any questions, please use the chat. At the moment, I can't see any questions, so I will use my privilege as a moderator to give my questions. And I would like to start with Dr. Monika Stobiecka's presentation and ask about the issue. Oh, actually, I see one question. So maybe I will start with this one. Thank you for the great presentation, Sonya. So this is the question to or remark to Sonya Darrow. Is there an evidence, stories about how your project empowers the female participants? Does participation help to prevent from loneliness among older ladies? Do they form support groups, and does the project support intergenerational integration? So let's skip to Brno for a while.
Thank you for your question. And the quick response is yes. And especially during this whole pandemic, it has definitely connected these women together. But also, I was trying hard to keep them still involved in the movement. I briefly mentioned how internet access, it's something a lot of them don't have. So we would go to their homes and drop off like a hotspot for internet and give that to them so they could still be involved. With the project back in my home country in the US, in Iowa, I used it as a way to get people vaccinated, actually. Started a whole chain of getting. So, the pandemic really was hard to put things together and make them connect to one another, but it also created some engagements that we would never have maybe thought of before.
Thank you so much. The word Oshumeli made a great impression on me. Thank you for mentioning during your presentation. Thank you for your answer. And I would like to go back to Warsaw and ask the question about the heritagization of various objects in this very city. You mentioned that I'm right now asking Dr. Monika Stobiecka. You have mentioned the
Yes.
post-war modernism as a topic of some, let's say, work dedicated to heritagization. These Powiśle objects, stations, Hungarian pavilion, Syrena pavilion are right now being a topic of some big public discussion. Are there any other similar stories in the other part of Warsaw that might be linked to this very process? I mean, are there any other layers of the history of Warsaw that are also today being seen as a kind of a place of heritagization strategies, heritage making strategies, besides of this big success of interest towards the post-war modernism, are there some other such stories?
Yes, thank you for this question. This is a great question. Actually, first thing is that I would say that Wiśle and definitely Śródmieście, so the city center, those are the battlefields between heritage activists, various heritage activists, because we have a lot of groups. Those bottom-up initiatives are very active in the city, and those are the this is the battleground between them, between those activists and the investors. And I mean, like myself living in Powiśle, and actually the buildings I mentioned, I pass them almost every day, and I see how the neighborhood is changing, and this is just disastrous because those are short-term strategies of heritage management. Yes, so we have what is clearly visible is that the investors are building are actually constructing advertisements of the new buildings in such a way to include Powiśle's heritage or Śródmieście's heritage in the advertisements, but at the same time they are demolishing this heritage, because how can you perceive a street that was built in the 19th century and has those old tenements from the 19th century or the very beginning of the 20th century with some new buildings that look like black zikkurat from Sumerian times. So this is I would say another problem that wasn't covered in my speech. So the particular tension between investors, activist groups, inhabitants, and I would say also heritage. Yeah.
Thank you so
I
much.
don't know if I fully read the question because. Okay.
Well, I would say that Warsaw is a fascinating case of heritage production. The city that was almost entirely destroyed, but also a city with a long history, tracing back to the medieval times, is a kind of a palimpsest of many various layers that, because of the political reasons after the World War II, have been hidden, sometimes still waiting for being found. And this is a big, I think, topic for the work of one hand side, public agencies, on the other hand side, activists, researchers. And this process, I think, is something really significant all over Poland, and I would say even in Central Europe is one of the most intriguing cases dedicated to heritage production. So thank you for bringing us at least some of this big battlefield of heritage as Warsaw is. But let us move right now to Budapest. I would like to thank Dalma for presenting us how Budapest is sprawling to the suburbs and how is occupying the new territories that used to be places for orchards, for vineyards. I'm very intrigued in how is the response of the local communities that are living in those places that are right now being conquered by the people from Budapest trying to find their place in the suburbs. What is their response? I mean, what is the response of the local community? And have you involved the local community into the process of research?
Thank you very much. The questions. Yes, I would like to answer the end of the question firstly. Yes, the local communities were take part in research work, and in every year when we have this kind of project near Budapest, integration zone mostly, we try to involve the inhabitants, the local communities actively into these projects. And we see that they like to take part in this kind of work, because they see that in this way there's a chance to improve their environment, to there's a chance to protect their heritages. We focus on the not only the protection and preservation, but also for the development, because some of these areas can be said that they are mostly lived by not the richest group, inhabitants. So these areas need to develop. But in this region, in this Polish region, there's a lot of problems, land use conflicts, because of the grey infrastructures improvement, development, because new motorways are planned in this region. It's useful for connection, of course, but at the same time they are a very big threat for the heritage protection, and the locals see it as a problem too. So in our projects we try to answer these problems, these land use conflicts, to this conflict with the help of the locals.
Thank you so much. I think that your presentation touched the universal problem of our region, actually not only our region, but very similar problems might be visible today in Krakow, in Warsaw, in Gdańsk, among the other cities of Poland. And I would like to ask also Marta Wróblewska one issue. You presented us the so-called golden era of Polish museums, the museum boom that started after the year 2000. Some says that it was with the opening of the Wrocław City Museum. Some says that it was later with the Warsaw Rising Museum. But anyway, around 2000, we can observe the beginning of this process. And as you mentioned, so many of these museums all over Poland are the narrative museums, based on the storytelling rather than on the presenting the objects. I was wondering if there is maybe some kind of a mistake in this strategy. This storytelling is very easy to be somehow manipulated or being used for, as you said, political purposes. I was wondering if how do you anticipate the future of the museum strategies? Is this, let's say, more than 10, almost 20 years of being so acquainted to the narration should be transformed into, let's say, more or less digital way, I would say, and more acquainted to the objects way of building the museum strategies?
Well, that's, I could start answering the question and go on for an hour at least, because it's a question that opens many fascinating windows for me. However, well, narrative museums are very interesting, very fascinating for the contemporary audience. The audience, well, one has to consider the fact that museums have to kind of go along with the demands and needs of the contemporary audiences. And the contemporary audiences, which is also us, we live in the media society. So I don't think the museums can really run away from the new technologies. I think storytelling and narrating is a beautiful way to engage the visitor into your story. However, as you rightly observed, it is, and it is also observed by many researchers in museology, that narrations can be easily manipulated. We can rely on the ethics of work. There is the code of ethics for museums. We could also rely on legal tools. Many museums have boards that are counseling boards. Many museums rely on expert teamwork, and I think that this is the best way to divide the power and make it a teamwork, make it a consultation ground for people, for groups that represent different perspectives and different approaches. Of course, there was a case with the Second World War Museum that such a counseling board was gotten rid of by the Ministry of Culture. So it is not entirely independent, and I think I really cannot say what the future of the museums will be right now. Maybe some legal solutions might help to retain this kind of ethics of work.
Thank you. As we heard on the first day of the conference, resilience means change. And well, we are in the process of change. Thank you so much for presenting us four very different approaches, four different perspectives of dealing with cultural heritage, with objects, and with the narratives. This is the last part of the session dedicated to resilience. And the time for the summary will be in the very end of the conference. The session about resilience right now is over, but please be with us. Some other sessions are still going on. Some other parallel sessions are still going on during this afternoon. At 6 p.m., we'll have the last meeting of this very conference, Pandemic at What Next? We invited experts from Krakow, from Rijeka, and from Prague to discuss the new strategies dedicated to culture. So please be with us. And after this last meeting, there'll be also the closing up session. So thank you very much for right now, and please be with us. The session about resilience is over.